All right, guys, welcome back. Good more Tim King. Thank you for that. Right as I'm starting my recording. This one is on numerical item design.
Hi everyone, it's me, Tim.
Hi,
Today I
Tim.
want to talk about numerical item design. This comes from a very good question from Homicidal Pacifist,
Okay, it's an interesting name.
who asked, can you talk a bit about item implementation?
Yeah.
How do you decide what types of items go in games, especially those with more unique effects like the shrink ray from Outer Worlds? For clarification, and I asked for clarification on this, I was thinking about the various ways that items are designed in games, from the more build crafting and grinding for 0.5% more fire damage approach, like Diablo, to more of your weapon type affects your playstyle approach, like Monster Hunter. And was wondering if you could maybe share your thoughts about the pros and cons of each for player or developer perspective.
That is a very good question, which is what Tim is about to say. I think a lot of it comes down to, I won't say laziness, but ease of implementation. There's a mix of both, right? You do it for dopamine. You do it for the emotions. If you're adding in the plus 5% extra damage, it's because you want some small rewards for the player between their big rewards. If you think of a game like Diablo, what are the big rewards? It's loot, right? It's getting new loot. But you don't always get new good loot. So the game puts in little dopamine drips in between those big moments, right? Like other item drops, gold drops, things that you can sell for something, right? Bait items, I guess we could call them. I don't think that's a good term for it, though. It's more like items that you think might be good but aren't, so you get a little disappointed. So the level up, the XP, it's all there to serve as a function of progression. Same with when you earn gold. Gold is a currency for progression, and I think that the numerical item design is fine when it serves a purpose for progression, and when there are other things in there that do change the game, like a shrink ray or something, or something that dramatically changes the way that you approach a title. When it's a crutch for progression, when your only progression is number go up, I feel like that gets old really fast. And then the game just becomes like about grinding. The core loop isn't changing. There isn't any variety. You're just making number go up, and it gets really boring after a certain point.
Very good question. I'm glad I asked for clarification because asking about item implementation, I would have gone on about how to do it in code. This is really a question about the item's designs.
Yeah. Yep.
So the first thing I want to say is just talking about the philosophy of item design is a really, really complicated question.
It's a big topic.
And it can be answered in so many different ways because, first of all, look at all the different item types there are in a game. There are the things you can wear, which is armor, and it can have different pieces for different parts of your body, and including your head and your legs and your arms and your torso. But there are also rings and amulets and gadgets, and these are just things that you can wear.
Yeah, and I think that, like Tim says, it's a very complex because the branching of what it does to you as a player and to you as a character, which are two separate things, is very deep. When you can open up your inventory and put on armor and see a visual change and a stat change, there are so many small things happening to you at one time. Not only do you feel as if you have agency, you have to strategize what you choose to wear. You have to manage your stats in the back of your head while you're playing. You see these visual changes, which helps you to feel more connected to your character and to the equipment that you're wearing. It might make some people choose certain items based purely on how they look, and this all plays into the emotions, into the gameplay. It's like it just breaks down deeper and deeper and deeper. And so when you think about progression of, oh, the player can put on armor, it's like, okay, but can the player see the armor changes? If not, we care primarily about the stat changes. If there are no stat changes, then it's just a dress-up game, right? Not a bad thing, but not, some people might be looking for something deeper than that. Same with the rings. Can you see the ring visual changes? Do the rings have different stat upgrades? How do you balance all of that? How do you manage that? It can just get really, really nuanced and granular.
Then there's wielded stuff like weapons and shields, and
You
if
could
the
change the way that
fantasy
you
game, maybe
attack.
like an orb
Different
or something.
stances, animations.
And of course, there's consumed things like potions or drugs, depending on your setting,
Ew.
scrolls, batteries, if you're a sci-fi setting. So because of that, you could use that as the design philosophy high level. But you also have to make sure your items fit your setting. For example, do you have a fantasy game or a sci-fi game? Like I just mentioned, you'd have orbs in fantasy and batteries in sci-fi.
Well, it's not even. I think it even goes beyond setting. It's like, how many items do we have? How cluttered do you want the player's inventory to get? Right? Is this like a System Shock game or something where you have inventory Tetris to deal with? Okay, then we don't want the player to have to carry too many items. Do we introduce a grid limit? Do we introduce a weight limit? Do we do both? How does the player use these items? Can the player combine these items? I think that numerical item design is just one aspect of item design as a whole. And look at the philosophy for Colton Chronicles. It was fewer items, more purposes. So we had primarily seeds, ingredients, potions. These were like the three main items that you had to deal with. And the way that you use those items could vary depending on the situation you were in.
But you also have to think about your mechanics. If you make a class-based game instead of a skill-based game, your items have to reflect that and give bonuses that are appropriate to classes or skills.
In which case you have to ask yourself, do you want items to drop that aren't part of your class? Some games do that. Some games have like that shared stash between characters. Other games do not drop items for the classes that you're not playing. I don't remember which game does. I think that Last Epoch gives you drop bonuses. No, wait. I think Last Epoch does do something with classes where you will get more items for the class that you're playing. But I could be wrong about that.
Similarly, if you make a turn-based combat rather than real-time combat, some of your items are going to affect that. Maybe they give you an earlier sequence in turn-based. Maybe they give you more action points to spend during turns.
But just beyond designing, I think Tim's right. You have to actually create these in the logic, and they have to work. They have to be debugged properly. I mean, if you have a ring that gives you plus 50% extra health when you wear it, what happens if you take that ring off? If you have 100 health from 150, do you go back down to 100? If you wear that at 50 health, do you go up to 100 health out of 150? Or do you stay at 50 health out of 150? And, there might be easy answers to this, but as a designer, you have to have those answers. And if you don't have those answers in documentation, I promise you, the programmers will be shitting down your neck, waiting for you to come up with those answers. You have to think about every little minute detail.
Versus real time.
Yeah, is it additive or multiplicative?
Swing a sword a little.
Is it multiplicative before certain other additive buffs? All of these matter.
Faster. It's you have to know what your setting and mechanics are before you even think about.
But those are low level
Item design.
Yeah,
but there are some things that are common to all of the different philosophies. It is, are these items aspirational? Meaning, do players want to get these items that are better? And this isn't just in terms of their design, but also in terms of their look, which I'll talk about when I get into pros and cons. Are there enough items for all the different player builds that can be made? All different classes and class race combinations and skill combinations. Are you covering those adequately with all of your items?
Yeah, are you enabling those builds? Even more hard if you're all that people like me. Like, I'm mainly a systems designer, so, when I think about, we need to have items, it's just like instinct to think about those aspects of it. Although there is a very big difference between high level and low level, right? If you want to say at the high level, we will have an object that increases your maximum health. That's fine. That's all you need. And even if prototyping, you can just say, well, implement it this way just for testing it out. And then you can make the low level documentation. Something like maximum health might be super easy, but first you make your games high level. What kind of items do we have? What kind of effects do we want? And then you can jump into the low level when you're implementing that feature or that system and say, okay, here's exactly how each of these should work. Here's how they should work when the player removes that item, when the player equips that item. Can we nullify that effect? Can that equipment break? Do we treat it the same as if, when that equipment breaks, do we treat it the same as if it was removed, or do we half the stats from that? There's a lot of systems that need to work really well in the back end for like an RPG game or an ARPG game where you have all those different pieces of loot. All games should just steal wand crafting from Noita. That's it. That's your entire game. Insert game here plus Noita.
And
Noita's a
then
good game.
are those items extensible? Meaning there's an obvious better version to it. So if you get, a sword,
What's the progression
here's a
look like?
better version of a sword. And this is not just for player, because I'm going to talk about comparability next. It's for things like crafting. Like when you get a recipe for a better version of a sword, is it obviously a better version?
And the reason why that's important is that it's a chase item, right? It's a goal. And when the player is playing pretty much any game, apart from a spare few, the player wants a goal. They want to know why they're playing the game. They need those goals. And you can have a long-term goal, like, okay, the long-term goal is to finish the game. Great. Well, what do I do in the meantime, right? If I've been playing Death Stranding recently, I know my goal is to progress through and unlock new bases, right? And add them to the network. Well, how do I do that? Well, I have to make certain deliveries. I have to help them. In the meantime, I can make smaller deliveries. I can help upgrade roads. I can help unlock other things. I can progress through the crafting chain of these people, right? I can level this base up to 5 stars to unlock all the crafting recipes and perks from it. So there's those intermediate goals that I can set myself while that long-term goal is being done in the background, or maybe even being paused while I focus on these smaller gameplay loops. Progression loops, let's call them.
Which leads me into comparability. Can the player look at 2 items and make a decision on which one is better, probably for their build? Because sometimes there are clear answers to that, and sometimes you deliberately want to design it so that, well, I'm going to have to give up a little something that I want to get something else that I want. And we're talking.
I think that's a really good point too. The problem that I have with modern design philosophies doing this is called power level, right? I think Diablo 4 had that. Diablo 4 itemization. I think Diablo 4's itemization is pretty shit. And the reason is exactly because of fucking item power. I hate that. Stop putting item power in the game. I don't want to see it. It's lazy. It's dumb. It forces people to play with a caveman-like brain where they just see, oh, item power better, that means item better. Make me read. Make me actually engage with your items and the stats that you've put on them. Although, to be honest, I think that Diablo 4 itemization is just kind of shit all around, to be honest. Not great. Don't copy Diablo 4 itemization in pretty much any way. Wouldn't recommend it. Think Wasabi is better than Bit Perfect for audio quality? I have no clue. I don't know what either of those are.
Talk about that. Because to get back to Homicidal Pacifist's question, he was effectively asking me for the design philosophy of numerical item design.
Yes.
And I'm going to talk about that in terms of numerical versus non-numerical.
Okay.
And let's talk about what that means. Numerical item design is when the designer is primarily concerned with things like the numbers attached to the items that become bonuses and adjustments to parameters in the game. Things like
most like modern ARPG, anything with RPG in it, modern is you have those, right? I think that I'm not a big fan of RPGs going so numerical heavy with items. I love playing games like that. Don't get me wrong. I love ARPGs. I love randomized loot. I just don't think that it's, hey, we're making RPG, therefore we must have randomized items and item stats and little bonuses and perks for you to upgrade. But it is a kind of a trademark feature or set of trademark features that you see in modern RPGs.
A hit bonus, or critical hit bonus, or critical damage bonus.
I don't know anything about that. Ancient
damage amounts in both terms of direct damage or damage over time, dots. Attribute bonuses, or secondary bonuses that are normally controlled by attributes. So if your strength gives you more carry weight, maybe an item gives you more carry weight directly. So it doesn't give you more strength, it gives you more carry weight. Basically, anything in your game that has a numerical parameter, items might adjust that parameter. Now compare this to non-numerical item design. These are things like effects that can happen when you use the item.
Yeah, like the Shrink Ray, or I think even Colden Chronicles, our game, our now canceled game, was a good example of that, where the potions they had some numerical design behind them, but it was mostly effects. And those need to have unique interactions and results in the world, and then you combine them. It was actually closer to Noita than it was like a modern RPG with the numerical item design. And I think that one of them, numerical item design doesn't change the way that you play the game in most cases. It can be build enabling, but it doesn't alter the gameplay in most cases. Unless the numerical aspect is so big that it dramatically shifts the way that like a skill is being used. I think Noit is a much better example because the wand that you pick up, depending on how that wand is built, the modules that it has on it, dramatically changes the way that you approach the game.
They can be effects on the player. Maybe you're silent when you wear these boots.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe this cloak slows the rate that enemy detect you when you're stealthing. But they also might be effects on the target that you use this item on. Maybe it shrinks them. Maybe it paralyzes them.
I mean, yeah, I think that like some of those do a bit of both, right? I think there's a spectrum here. It's not binary. It's not that if you have any items, they don't affect the gameplay, and if you have just gameplay effects like a shrink ray, it doesn't alter the way, or it can't alter the way that your build is set up either. I think that there is a difference here, and I think that players do prefer a mix of both. But as you move towards one end of the spectrum, there's definitely a lot more unique aspects that you need to include in the game compared to if you set up the numbers and the systems to modify those numbers well. You can just say, oh, well, the player has health. We can now modify that max health. The player has damage. We can modify that damage. And it's just, it's just simple float or integer math that you can do right on top of the game.
Maybe they run away in fear for a while. Why these can and usually do have some kind of numerical parameter attached to them. How, much does it slow your rate of stealth detection? How long do they stay paralyzed or feared? The primary purpose, though, is to change how the player acts. Basically, as OP said, it affects their playstyle. They will think of playing the game a different way because of this item.
Yeah, if you have like a whirlwind effect on like an axe, and you previously weren't using the whirlwind skill, but this new axe is pretty same damage, let's say, but it adds plus 300% area of effect to whirlwind. Well, now you're like, well, I can hit way more enemies at one time with this. This is great for build clearing. Not so great for bosses, right? Because maybe I want something that is more single target. But if the game allows me to switch weapons in some simple way, right? I can have this for clearing enemies and another weapon for enabling my single target skill damage a lot. So yeah, stuff like that can be, numerical changes can be build enabling, but I think they have to be meaningful numerical changes and not just plus 2% damage, right? Because it's like, okay, what do I do with that? What do I do with that? Or plus 10 damage to enemies who have their back turned to you. Okay, how much is 10 damage? Well, it's about 0.01% of the damage that you'll do total. Okay, great. So it doesn't mean anything. It takes me a fraction of a second longer to kill an enemy otherwise. Wonderful.
Not, I'm going to play the same way I always played, and this gives me a +5 on that.
Exactly.
So let's now dive in to the pros and cons of numerical versus non-numerical item design. I'll start with numerical because I think not only is that easier to imagine, but it makes it nice to contrast with non-numerical. So let's talk about the pros of numerical item design. First of all, it's very easy to design these. You're usually going to make your rule mechanics. It's the third thing you do after setting and story.
And that's really the reason why it's often it's the same reason why with difficulty settings that the easiest solution is just to like increase enemy health, decrease player damage. It's such a simple multiplier that you can just do right out of the gate, and you don't have to think about it. The problem is that's usually the difficulty modes that people hate the most. They're done in RPGs where you have those enemies with those scaling health bars, and if you just scale up that health bar even more, where's the fun in that, right? A recent example is Expedition 33 that I think does it better, which is lowering the response timings to parries and dodges. That's skill. Now your difficulty is skill-based and not just, it takes me 10 extra arrow hits to kill an enemy, right? You're not turning enemies into damage sponges. So I prefer when it changes skill, or if at all it can change reaction times by enemies. So maybe I think that Doom 2016, somebody correct me if I'm wrong here. Doom 2016 does very little increases to enemy health on higher difficulties, but it does increase their reaction times, or decreases the reaction times technically, and adds in some new abilities for their AI. That is a good way to do it, and that's a perfect game to do that design, because you're just making the game require more skill at higher difficulty levels, not require more shots. That's not fun for most people. Yeah, bullet sponges just aren't really enjoyable. I'm not a big fan of them in almost every single case. The only case where I can argue that bullet sponges are, or increasing enemy health is a little bit better, is for maybe like tactical games, like Baldur's Gate 3, where it allows it adds to the attrition, where I can have really good tactics, but I need to make sure that I am positioning my character well. So there are some cases where I can argue that increasing enemy health is not going to have as much of a bad effect as in other games, but it depends on the game. I don't think there's any difficulty design that is just one size fits all. If you have a good tactic that can nuke bosses in 2 hits, you can have that, but maybe just make it powerful, but give the enemies more health so that it compensates. I don't know. It's a complex topic. We could go on for hours about talking about difficulty design. You're building roguelike, and something I'm concerned about balancing the item design. If you want Codex, if you're open to it, that's like my bread and butter. And if you ever want to reach out and have me do that for your game, always open to it. I will definitely find the time to do it. I love doing it. Give me a spreadsheet, get your game balanced.
And those rules are going to have parameters, and there you go.
Those
are the parameters you want adjusted on your numerical item design. You have a chance of hitting someone, this can give you a bonus to hit them. Mm-hmm. You do this much damage, this can give you a bonus to that damage. Very easy, very straightforward. And because of that, it's easy to code. I'm talking to you programmers out there. When you get these numerical item designs, you're like, whew, this is easy. You have parameters you use in your code. You basically collect the parameters from the items and apply them to where you're doing the calculations in the code. The other side benefit of this is those parameters can be exposed to designers. Yep. So if they come back later and go, this weapon is too powerful with +5, can you make it +4? And the programmer can go, no, you can do that. It's right here. It's an exposed value. You can change it.
I'm going to be honest. If a designer ever asks a programmer to I would say that, okay, Tim's just making a funny point here, but I feel the need to dive into this just as a little bit of an aside. I think that really good gameplay programmers should expose stuff like that. Number one, probably without even needing to be asked. Number two, good designers should write down that those should be exposed. And maybe number three, designers should want to have that exposed and to want to play around with it. I feel like people shit on old games for the difficulty, but to be fair, they made the most of what they had with the memory size. Yeah, and also just games were new, right? Like, video games were new, and it was new to switch to real-time methods of combat. And a lot of real-time based games are getting, just games as a whole are getting more mature. The genre's evolving. The average audience is evolving. You barely have a flight controller working. No worries, Codex. But we'll keep in touch. If you're on the Discord, you can always just send it to me. Seems complicated. Hey, Kitty's Chips. It's been a long time since I've seen you. I hope you're doing well.
Like Unity and Unreal make that really easy for you to do.
Yes, they do.
But another pro for numerical item design is it's very easy to both extend and compare items. Mm-hmm. What that means is
number bigger or better.
It's very aspirational. You get a sword that and you love beating people up, and it does +10 damage, and then you get a new one that says +20. Yay, that's a better sword, and you really want to use that sword.
And that's not, like I said, it's not just important because it's easy progression, but that progression it's easy to do in the short term. When you find weapons, when you find those little buffs, they're little dopamine drips for the player, and that can help to bridge gaps in larger engagement, right? If your game is literally just, let's imagine Diablo. take away all of the enemy drops, and the only time you get loot is when you clear a dungeon. Doesn't feel as rewarding, does it? Like, even if the item drops are good, without those intermediary drops, you kind of feel as if what's the point? Like, I could just run to the end of the level and grab the loot off of the boss. I think actually a good example is, doesn't World of Warcraft do this? You're describing rifts. I think that Stalker 2 also has this problem right now where um, you can fight mutants and waste a lot of your ammo, but they don't drop anything. So it's like, okay, why do I fight mutants then if they're just a waste of my resources and don't give me anything in return? So I would say even beyond the dopamine drips of rewarding, it is a purpose to spending your time. Maybe that's a good way to put it. You're getting a small reward out of a small dedication of time, and then the dungeon rewards at the end are a larger reward for a larger investment of time, or for that combined investment. The reward system is simply a lot of people play to find purpose or dopamine. Yeah, and I think that a lot of MMOs are like that, right? Where they're built to be dopamine drips, to be grind fests, and in this, I'll explain it in a deeper design sense. They're designed to have small achievable goals that lead to a larger achievable goal, and that is a never-ending cycle. That is the entire design loop, is to keep you engaged through those small and larger rewards to find the next small and large rewards to jump onto. I think psychology goes into every game, but psychology of engagement is built into MMOs for sure because they're live service, and in order to sustain a live service economy, you need to have people continuing to pay money and play in the game. Usually those go hand in hand, right? Like with microtransactions or loot boxes, premium currencies. So you keep people engaged because it statistically makes them want to spend more, and then the cycle continues to go. And I think that that's fine, right? There are games that I love to play, like Path of Exile. I love playing PoE. I've played thousands of hours of it. I've spent money on it because I find the game fun. But the game is designed in that way to have those drips, to have those small achievable goals, to have those variances in gameplay sessions, right? If I want to, I don't know, complete a long chain of maps, that might take me 3 hours. Or I can just do a small map, and that's maybe 30 minutes, or do a couple of delve runs, and that's maybe 5 to 10 minutes per node on the delve map. And so I can choose my gameplay length, and I get rewarded for that, and that's great. I think that's fantastic game design for what it is. But it is built in that way where it's trying to keep you engaged and give you options so that you keep spending money on the game. Now, the good thing is that the game is fun, right? And there are games that I think do it in a way that is more predatory or a little bit more, we call it grindy, but it's really just unreward. It's not rewarding enough for the amount of time that you spend doing it. And that's where I think that the models start to get a little bit unethical because they're not really thinking about the player's experience first. They're thinking about how to optimize the best player experience with the most amount of money that they get, and they kind of choose the easiest way of trapping you in those psychological loops rather than just make a good game and people will stay engaged because it's a good game. I prefer that, but it is harder to make. Ooh, sorry, that was a bit of a rant.
However,
Sorry,
I want to put a caveat in here. Even comparing numerical items can be a difficult decision for the player. Do I want to get that armor that's heavier but gives me a higher damage resistance? I'll have to decide, and this is pure numerical. Depends on how I play. If I have a really strong character, I may not care about the armor weighing a little more. If I have a weak...
Well, yeah, and I think that that's really important, especially in games that you think of like Souls-like games, like From Software games, where you have that encumbrance. There are like a few stats that you generally prioritize in a Souls-like game. And it kind of depends on your build, but it also depends on certain mechanical changes. So they don't give you like 5,000 stats and all of them are really meaningful and you should care about all of them. They give you a lot of stats, but you only really need to care about kind of a few of them, like how much health do I have? What's my stamina? What's my weight? And which category does this fall into? Does it fall into the light roll, the normal roll, or the fat roll? Which one am I doing? And so you pick up a new piece of gear, but it's not like it should be too game changing. It should just try to help augment the build or not augment your build. And so you make these smaller jumps and find your perfect combination. To me, you think the Division 2 is exactly a perfect example of keeping you trapped. They keep you grinding on a forever cycle to keep current players to keep playing. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of the forever cycles. And the loot pinatas, yeah. Just personally, I like there being a ceiling, right? And I like the ceiling being relatively obtainable in a normal amount of playtime. Korean MMOs are horrible with this. It's not pay to win. You just have to play 24/7, 365 days a year, and ignore everybody in your family, and then you can obtain this thing in real life, in normally without having to pay money. Fantastic. I like when games are more like, we have a cycle, and it becomes harder and harder to obtain those best items, but you can obtain it with about 200 hours of time put into our game, like an MMO or something, or like Borderlands or something, right? And even Borderlands is even better than this because it's like you can obtain the best weapons probably with 50 to 100 hours of gameplay in the game. Okay, fine. If that's what the ceiling is, I'm happy with that. OG Korean MMOs back when pay to win wasn't a thing. Lineage 2, man, I love those days. I also had time to know life and grind, but then they discovered pay to win and made it even worse. Yeah, now it's just about optimizing those psychological loops. Like seasonal cycles rather draining all of your time, like you said. Yeah, I think seasons work well. PoE does that to great extent, I think.
Care about the armor weighing a little more. If I have a weak character, it's like, oh, I can barely pick up the items I want now.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to go with that. So let's get into the numerical cons. Cons of numerical item design, I should say. Sometimes it's really hard to make them super exciting, like OP hinted at when you get a 0.5% damage
Yeah,
bonus. I've mentioned this before. Like EverQuest had this issue where when on a range of 1,000, did you really care about getting armor that was +1 better? And if you're comparing two
sorry, Tim.
weapons and one is 51 damage and the other is 50 damage, okay, the 51 damage is better, but it's not very exciting. It's like, oh great, I do one more point.
It is really hard to find a balance, but there is a balance. I believe with numerical item design, there is a balance with every single game that could be achieved. I love Path of Exile, okay? I really do. But ultimately, there's a lot of nodes in here that don't have much meaning. I love this game. I think it's great. I love planning builds. But there's a lot of meaningless change. There's a lot of meaningless upgrades in here. I kind of prefer. I don't even kind of prefer. I think that Last Epoch does this better. Last Epoch, you can get a maximum of 20 points to spend on any skill. And in almost every case, these are actual meaningful numerical upgrades or systemic. There's maybe systemic. I don't think is the right word. Like system based change to how that skill works that you either want or don't want, and you have those different paths that kind of lead into different build styles. I vastly prefer this because I know that when I get I get a skill point for this skill, it's actually going to meaningfully change my progression. I just prefer that. I don't know how to put it. And I think that this is the balance between. This is the balance. Here's another good example. Torchlight 2 skill tree. Torchlight 2, I would say, was even simpler than all of that. And so to me, this is like super simple, not very much to think about. Then you have the other end of the spectrum, and then you have the middle ground. Or actually, even better, was it Mass Effect 2 or 3? This is what I'm thinking of. This is one end of the spectrum, and it works. There are games where this can work, where it's not meant to be super complex, not meant to be super numerical. You just kind of find the one you want to choose, you choose it, and you get back to the actual game. This is for autistic nerds like me who don't even play Path of Exile anymore because you're too busy in Path of Building, designing your next build, and then you jump into the game to make it, and you're like, oh, that's too much work. Back to Path of Building. So I think the last epoch is that really good middle ground between the two. So there is a balance. But it depends on the game, because sometimes this works, sometimes this works. But I would argue for a larger audience, this is what you should aim to try and achieve in most skill trees. When you have a tree like PoE, is shit even meaningful anymore? There are some really big meaningful nodes in Path of Exile. Absolutely. I don't know if I have I do have Path of Building installed. This is the program, by the way. So, there are things that like 28% increased armor. There's massive ones like the Keystones. Like these. Life leech from melee damage is instant, but you can't recover life other than from leech. So you have to attack enemies in order to leech life. You never deal critical strikes, but you deal 40% more attack damage if your accuracy is higher than max life, which it usually is. So there are some really big nodes that can change gameplay, but then you just have like plus 10 strength. These are the intermediary nodes that arguably you could design a skill tree without it. Now, I think that they've utilized the skill tree pretty well, where if you want to operate in the center of the skill tree, you have more nodes that you have to take to get around. But as you go further out, you can jump between points much bigger. So you can choose like 6 points to get from here to here, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 to get to here. So I think that they designed it well to escape that a little bit, but there is still some of that problem. Just imagine the nightmare behind coding all this. Oh god, I don't even want to know. I don't even want to know. Because Path of Building is even scarier than that. Or Path of Exile. Hey, Fortune Man. You have gems that you have jewels that you can slot into the tree that can actually change the passive nodes in the radius around it. So you might have like a you might have like this elegant hubris timeless, which if we slot into here, which one is this? Oh, here it is. Oh wait, I didn't unlock that. Hold on. It's now changed the passive nodes in this, in the radius of this this node. Although I don't think it says it. It's easier to see in game. Timeless jewel PoE. They will actively change the node. It's like it's gotta be crazy to code. You think it's pretty trivial to code? I don't know. I think it'd be pretty hard, especially to debug it. All that complexity just to express spin to win screen delete nonsense builds that only maximize one stat. You think it's easy? I don't know. I doubt it.
And then here's the part that a lot of designers don't think about. Think about your artists. I'm talking to you now, artists. You know what I'm talking about when you have to make appropriate art for two different items, and the difference is minor.
Icons,
okay, the artist comes up to you and goes, I made these really cool boots that give you plus 10 to stealth. Now you say there's a completely different set of boots that give plus 11 to stealth. Yeah. And then they're like, can I just make them a different color? And I'm always like, no, I'm colorblind. So they do something like maybe put a little star on it. Now they could make something that looks wildly different, but they probably have hundreds of these to make. And if you throw in a huge range of these things and the difference is plus 10 versus plus 11, these artists are going to start pulling their hair out after a while because you're asking for a lot of wildly different things. and making them look appropriate, both appropriately different, and also the plus 11 should look a little better than the plus 10, it gets hard to do after a while.
Yeah.
Similarly, it's hard to compare. I've already talked about how two numerical items can have a little bit of difficulty comparing, but if you have a numerical and non-numerical item, and I'll jump into numerical and non-numerical in a second, you have to make a choice. Let's say you have a weapon that does more damage, and you have another weapon that gives you a higher chance of your stealth attack being successful. Which one of those are better weapons? Because you fight all the time, but your stealth damage bonus is higher, and this will make you do more stealth attacks. But then you're like, well, wait, how much will it improve? And is it better than the damage I'm getting all the time from this one? And of course, that depends on a lot of factors, like how often do you try to do a stealth attack? What is your stealth skill?
I think that there's also an additional layer to that Tim has brought up, where with a lot of numerical item design, you often will limit the passives that can appear, or the buffs that could appear on that item, even at certain stages. I'll just go back to Path of Exile as an example. I think it's Path of Crafting, or Craft of Exile. Craft of Exile, that's what it is. I was a big crafter in PoE, and so I would use this a lot, where you have that base type of armor, and each base type can then determine what passives you have on that. So you get to choose, well, I want to craft the best item. How do I do this? What prefixes and suffixes do I have available? What tiers of that do I have available? And you have to decide that as a designer too, when you design that, and you have to determine how is this going to affect the player's gameplay at each moment. You know, if they require a certain level of that item to craft the best tier, in this case, additional physical damage reduction, they will need to find a eye level 86 item to craft that. Well, I found one that's eye level 85, so technically I can never roll this on the item. The best I can get is 7%. Now, how much of a difference is 7 to 8%? Not very much, but there are certain stats that I think that is way more important on, right? Especially with like max life or something, which can then get increased and multiplied. So having more max life is always nice. So, I mean, numerical based games are just, I think, kind of a headache to code and to balance, especially. The con is you have to make it all make sense, and it has to feel good to the player.
Some of this can be calculated out numerically, and you see people make spreadsheets for games all the time, but it's hard. And it's not so straightforward to go, oh, that numerical item and that non-numerical item are trivial to compare. And some of the comparisons, Matt, your build takes into account. So
yeah, and well, you can't design on paper. I mean, you can start to do the rough design, you can start to do the rough balance on paper, but if anybody says, yeah, just give me your spreadsheet and I'll balance it, and then never plays the game, right? Or they're gonna like write the design document and they're like, here's the design for my new item. New great item does, and this is gonna have like, or new great system, right? And then this is gonna progress from 10% damage to 50% damage. And it's like, okay, well, how does that feel in the game, right? You can write this down, that's great, but I don't want to see a design document where you put in all these specific numbers, because you can't test that yet. The system hasn't been built. It hasn't been prototyped. You don't know how it feels in the rest of the game. Just say, we need a number. We need a percentage damage increase. Clamp it to 1 out of 100. It can be an integer. And then just tell the programmer, just put in whatever. I'll go through and balance it. Just set it to like 20% or something right now. Don't put all that nonsense. Don't put like crazy formulas and all this shit. Don't give me a spreadsheet and call it your items economy design, because you just don't know. That doesn't tell me how it functions in the game. It doesn't tell me how often the player is picking up these items to affect their carry weight or their gold stocks. I don't want to see any of that.
So you may see somebody online going, oh, go with the stealth one. And you're like, I never do stealth attacks. Why would I do that? So let's jump into non-numerical item design and talk about the pros and cons for that, because they're different. let's talk about the pros of a non-numerical item. First of all, there's a lot more cool and therefore aspirational effects that you can put on non-numerical items. We're talking an item that may polymorph your enemy into a cow, or knock them back, or make them explode. And by the way, that could lead to then chain explode, like they explode and nearby people explode when they get hit with the explosion. This is cool, and it's very aspirational, and it allows players to think of their build styles and let their imagination run wild and create really interesting, fun
Yeah,
characters.
it's absolutely the case. I mean, look at Larian Studios and what they did with Divinity Original Sin. Enabling Barrelmancer, which if you guys haven't seen, I'll show you Barrelmancy in Divinity. I think you can actually even do it in Baldur's Gate 3 too. Actually, yeah, exactly. Spiffing Brit does it. It's a perfect example with this one. Because you can
just move the chest behind you, and there we go. Critical hit of 6,000 damage.
Because you can put things into chests, and that increases the chest's weight, and then you can move the chest on top of enemies, and it does damage based on the weight of the item. You can make an entire build that's just about moving a chest full of barrels on top of enemies in order to kill them. That's the build. You don't even use weapons. Your weapon is a chest full of other things. That's cool. That's perfect. That's something cool that breaks the game, yes, but because it's a single player game, or it's co-op, really just have fun with it. Most players won't do this, but if they want to do it, they can. Or you have the sausage builds in Baldur's Gate 3. Having cool, unique things that you can do based on systems, like for instance, maybe you can change people into sheep, and then you find an item, your sheep or your transmogrified enemies explode on death. Okay, I'll make a build about changing people into sheep, and then those sheep are easy to kill and they explode on death. Or maybe enemies that get exploded turn into sheep if their health is low enough. So I just need to get enemies' health really low, and then they can just chain react into sheep and explode. There's so many cool things you can do if you just think about, okay, what if we stop making everything a numerical value and we start giving unique functions to the game? Here's one thing, with Cold Chronicles, one of the things I pitched was that you're an alchemist. You don't know how to cast spells. You're not a mage, but you have mana. If you help a mage in the game, even though he might be really evil and you don't want to do it because he's evil, he'll teach you a fireball spell. You now don't need to make potions of immolation because you can cast fireballs. And the publisher was like, oh, that's too complex. No, it's not. It's a fucking input button. And we already have the fire effect for immolation anyway. And the cool thing is this changes the game. Now people think, oh, I'm going to be an alchemist, but I can help people and they can change the way that I even approach levels based on helping them. This is meaningful progression that isn't numerical, but is actually build enabling or game changing. I don't want to get into publishers right now, but
similarly, artists have more
it's impactful
to go on to inspire them for the look and the effects.
It's unexpected.
Not just making the explosion look cool and making polymorph look cool and knockback look cool, but also the item itself can have something really cool about it because it does something, and that may inspire them for the look of the item. But let's talk about the cons. Cons of non-numerical items. It can be hard. I've already mentioned to compare numerical and non-numerical items together.
Yep.
But it is hard to compare two non-numerical items. Like, what's better, stunning someone or knocking them back? Stunning them means they may stand there not doing anything. Knockback they get pushed away, and then they have to stand back up and come back. Which one's better? Is it just which one lasts longer? Maybe, maybe not. It depends on what your playstyle is. It's also a lot harder to design non-numerical items. First of all, you have to have ideas for these because it's not just as simple as here's a number and a parameter we've already got in a formula. But then you have to balance these ideas. Like, is polymorph doable? Is it possible? How do you balance that? If I polymorph someone into a fish, they're just going to die. I don't have to do anything.
That's true. I think that there's two examples that I've already used here. Like Elden Ring, let's use as one, and Path of Exile, we'll use as another. Path of Exile is when you go so far down the spectrum of unique builds and playstyles that you just force the player to have to learn a million different things before they feel like they understand the game at a very basic level. But that makes the game very beginner unfriendly. It makes the learning curve so steep that it's actually just hard to understand. The second one, I would say, is like Elden Ring, where, like I mentioned before, you pick a few key mechanics that the player should focus on more than anything else. Like Neo is a good example too, similar style of game, where you have stances. So you build around stances. Pick a few of those systems that you want the player to focus on, which the player will have to learn, and that might be unique to your game, and those can be unique selling points, and then push a lot of your items, your skills, your numerical changes around these few systems, rather than just saying, oh well, enemies can bleed, enemies can be on fire, enemies can be blighted, enemies can be stunned, enemies can be crouching, and we're gonna put bullshit filler numerical item values to plus 15% damage to crouching enemies. Well, when the fuck is an enemy crouching? Well, during 2% of the gameplay. Great. Fantastic. I'm going to build my entire build around this, or I'm going to ignore this stat, and now every time I see this stupid buff on an item, it's useless to me. Great. Don't do that. Build around those impactful things. Like poise, like the stances of Neo, like in, if your jump height is important to your game, build around the jump height and sacrifice jump height to gain movement speed, and now the player is like choosing between those build styles. I think that of course you can build enable without making useless stats, but just know that the more builds you enable and you funnel somebody down a build, you might end up with that as a side effect. So try to limit that a little bit by finding those core skills that you have in your game. Fallout, as Tim has made as a good example, you have those core skills that you work with. Just make sure that you can enable different builds with those skills, but don't throw anything that is just kind of wacky, that doesn't make sense, and that would potentially limit the random loot pool. Fallout 1 and 2 didn't have to deal with this, but a lot of, like ARPGs with a lot of random loot, they do have to deal with this. Nobody wants to pick up an item and see useless stats on it. It does, and even in Path of Exile, by the way, it doesn't have to be useless to you to be useless, because you can sell items to other characters unless you're playing solo self-found. So I can still find weapons that are really useful to somebody else's build, and I can sell those items to that person to make currency that I can use to buy items that are good for my build. So it's just, I don't want to pick up something where it's plus 2% damage to crouched enemies when I barely ever encounter crouched enemies. That's filler, it's useless, it isn't build enabling because there isn't enough of gameplay to build this around.
Anything else.
Sorry, Tim.
And then extensibility is an issue because non-numerical extensibility can be hard. I mentioned if something makes you explode, if an item makes you explode, and then an obvious extensible thing is chain explosion, where if they explode and they hit people nearby, maybe they explode. What's the next thing after chain explosion? It's not very clear what you should do next. Also, and I'm back talking to you programmers, it is way harder to code these non-numerical effects.
Yep.
Every single one needs special code. You are usually tying into your status effect system and art systems and animation systems, and it's just a lot harder than going from plus 10 damage to plus 20 damage. Every science weapon in the Outer Worlds had special code associated with it.
And that's one of the reasons I do feel really impressed by Path of Exile, just because Path of Exile has so many unique nodes that actually do change the way that you might approach your build or game. Not as simple as plus 10 attack damage, right? It could be actually completely modifying the way a skill works or the way something else handles. And the fact that they were able to, actually the skills in general, the skill gems of PoE are, it's pretty incredible how it's coded and how it works. So, props to the PoE devs for actually making that work. So you want to have more in-depth that item, and it's not required, but you want to include the backstory or whatever, include it in the menu somewhere. So if someone wanted, they could read about it. Yeah, that too. There's just a lot to think about in terms of itemization. I don't think you should approach a game and say we want items because items are cool. We shouldn't be asking, should we include this item because picking it up is cool. It's like, what does this item do?
So it was a lot harder to code those than to code the numerical item designs.
Yeah.
And remember, more code, harder code leads to more bugs, more debugging time, more testing, etc. All that.
Yes, it does. And that is often an undermentioned, underappreciated aspect of adding in so much complexity, is that if you have 20 different builds that you want to enable, you will have to test all 20 of those builds. If you want to have all these random items, you will have to test multiple times, even playing the same content, to see if your random item generation is satisfying enough. Because maybe you do a test run and you get really lucky. Maybe you do a test run and you get really unlucky. How are you gauging this from play to play, and how are you instructing your QA team, or your external QA team, even worse, to determine if the game is actually satisfying? How do you bring in a playtester when they get really bad RNG? How do you say, oh, well, I'm sorry, you just had bad RNG? Well, that doesn't change the fact that the last hour of my play session wasn't fun and wasn't rewarding. It's not that it was bad RNG, it's that the game actually just wasn't enjoyable for that hour. Dino, thank you for the follow. Sorry that there's no sounds. There's something broken with that. I gotta fix that. Bad RNG, swipe some more, yeah. Just think kiss when you when thinking about the user interaction. Yeah, if you don't need it, don't add it. And I think in most cases that should be the way that you approach it. Why are we adding this? Why do you want this feature? What is the point? Another dino friend, absolutely. We want to make a cute little plushie with Riley the Raptor too. It's a fun little guy. How are you doing? This is where AI comes in. You punt the item to an LLM, and then you punt the playtesting to an agent model, and then you don't release the game because it's just AI entertaining AI without any humans in the loop. Don't jinx it. That's going to happen.
Code leads to more bugs, more debugging time, more testing, etc. All that. One last thing I want to say, I think that's all of the things I can think of, is as with every feature I've ever talked about, some players have a preference.
Yep.
They even have a preference, some may like numerical items, some may like non-numerical. Some even have a preference that's based on their player build. The character they made, that one they prefer numerical items, the other one they prefer non-numerical. It really depends. So there is no clear answer, which is why I like to do these pros and cons lists.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to do it. I agree with you, Tim. I think this is why it's important to know your competition. It's important to know your who your average user is, who is your golden boy or girl that you're holding up on a pedestal to say, these are the people that we want to bring to our game. Because then you can say, well, what games are they playing? What are their favorite games? Why are they their favorite? What are they enjoying about it? And by analyzing the competition as well, you can say, well, what are these games doing that people like? If I'm making an ARPG, I need to ask myself, why is Path of Exile 2 getting so many downvotes? What is it that people don't like about Path of Exile 2 that they liked about Path of Exile 1? And I can say, support team is disappointing. Okay, that's not really about the design. MTX would be usable. I need something about design here. Not as fun or rewarding. Okay, so maybe I can talk to some people. Why is it not feeling fun and rewarding? What is it about it? Despite having a humongous skill tree, you do not have freedom within it. Every character is inevitably locked into a few meta builds, literally 3 to 4 builds. This is a problem that I had with the game too. So when we're making a new game, we need to say, okay, we shouldn't be making a humongous skill tree to compete with skill tree sizes with all these other games. We should be making sure that we're making meaningful builds, meaningful skills that, if developed properly, if given the proper numerical buffs that we can provide through, unique gear that can drop, or gear sets with, massive bonuses to those skills, the players can build around that, right? So you have like a throwing knife skill that doesn't do very much damage, but it does really high crit rate. Okay, so let's make a set of items that when you wear all the set, you now throw 3 of those knives, and it increases your crit rate as well, or increases your crit damage. Let's build enable via these skills that on their own are okay, but when you really invest into them, you get that viable build out of it. Sometimes if you're too focused on competition too, you can get lost in what your company truly is. This is true. Yeah, if you're too focused or you're like trend chasing, it's not good. It's just I think it's about finding why am I including this thing in the game? Are we including a humongous skill tree because it's actually meaningful and provides a lot of opportunities for different builds? Or are we including the skill tree because Path of Exile, a game that we like, has a big skill tree and therefore we should have a skill tree too, right? Whenever I'm making a new feature, when I'm working in like a design document for a company, I always put what's the purpose? What is the purpose of this feature? What is it doing for the player? How is it benefiting their moment to moment gameplay? That's usually what I approach it with. But this was a good video, a lot to think about. You could go on for hours and hours about numerical item design, but I don't want to at this moment. So this is a great video by Tim. Here's the link. Please go give Tim a like and subscribe. He really deserves it all. He makes fantastic videos, and no matter what you're looking for when it comes to game production, game design, Tim's probably got a video about it. And if you're curious, we have a lot of his reactions too up on our YouTube channel. If you're watching on YouTube, of course, you probably already see these. We have a massive amount of 91 videos where if you're looking for something to put up on your second monitor or minimized and just listen in the background, we have plenty of hours to keep you covered. All right, if you're watching on YouTube, thanks for watching that one, and I'll catch you on the next one.